Hello everyone, I'm George from Ireland. So this video is going to be talking about Donald Trump's criminal mindset. So he came from such a privileged family, and he considers himself to be privileged in the sense that he's above the law. He's said it himself, the Fifth Avenue principle of his, lying all the time, and the complete deglutition of these lies is particularly galling. How is it 40% of Americans can approve of him, which presumably means a level of trust? They say trust is important in any relationship. Presumably that means in a political relationship, if you will. Trust in the leader, not only to be telling the truth, but also to be steering the ship of state aright. You can see his shifty eyes when he's lying. And the thing is, he doesn't come out with weasel words. It's just straight out lying time and again, which is obviously contemptible. So no respect for truthfulness at all. And like many a felon, he has this sense of victimhood, even though he's victimizing others. It's me. Oh, they've been very unfair to me. What a whinge bag. And the Republican Party, all about being tough, being an alpha male, man up. We don't like these snowflakes. What a snowflake he is. That the media is unfair to him, and the court would be unfair to him, but Mueller wouldn't be unfair to him. And then he was saying the whole thing was rigged and completely unfair until it became a more or less acceptable result for him, in which case he felt it was totally vindicated, and Mueller was a man of the most unimpeachable integrity. So he's got this sense of entitlement that he's allowed to steal, like embezzling from his own supposed charities. But he's pitted against American values so often, like the rule of law, the free media, which he's against. I suppose in some senses the military, like scorning John McCain for being captured, flew many perilous combat missions over Vietnam, was horrifically tortured in North Vietnam for several years, gallantly refused a chance to return home until others had turned back. He chose to be without his wife and children, and think of how heartrending that was. We think, come on, I've done enough duty to my country, I've got to do my duty to my family. But no, he wouldn't do so. A man of immense fortitude. I would have been out of there like a shot if I was offered the chance. So, but Trump is against this idea of rugged individualism. Remember that? Which Republican president said that one? Warren Gamaliel Harding. And now Trump's not into that, standing on his own 2 feet, inheriting money from daddy, and borrowing money that he can't pay back, and crashing his businesses and so on, and then getting public money, getting his own personnel to stay in his hotel, some money from the taxpayers to him. People on minimum wage have to pay money to him, and on and on. And obviously foreign embassies far more likely to hold their receptions in Trump hotels because they know that's a way to curry favor with him. They say there's no such thing as a free lunch, and these might be countries where there's no such thing as a disinterested gift in politics. So he's got such a scorn for the Constitution, and all sorts of human rights instruments. Remember his presidential campaign saying, yeah, I bring back far worse than waterboarding. I would remind him that the United States in 1979 ratified the Convention Against Torture, Inhuman and Degrading Treatment. Now, waterboarding, was that breaking it? Yes, but he was going to do far worse than that, so even more so that he was going to deliberately kill civilians, not to kill them as a byproduct of killing enemy combatants. No, he was going to go out of his way to target and kill civilians. Another crime against humanity that he advocated in 2016. So he scorns civil liberty. He's against the freedom of the press, calling them enemies of the people. And he has no common decency, as has been shown time and again. So there are so many dispositive clues about his peculation, about fraud in relation to Trump University, which wasn't a university at all. And then since he became president, he's continued in a similar vein, as I said, as in misdirecting public funds to his own businesses. How does this not breach the Emoluments Clause? With the stroke of a pen, separating families, illegal immigrants and so on. Now, why was that necessary to do so until all of a sudden it wasn't necessary to do so? It was crucial in early 2019, and when the pressure became too much, he caved in. Remember his supporters who thought he was being really tough on this one? He let them down, but for some reason they didn't abandon him. It was crucial, but then it wasn't crucial. So it shows that it doesn't make sense at all, him claiming that it was vital to national defense and all the rest of it. So with this coronavirus, the blood of innocence will surely be on his hands, because he could have done so much more. I know it's possible to exaggerate the importance of the presidency. He could have at least led by example, social distancing, given out the right messages relentlessly about, don't touch your face masks, social distancing, and he could have done so much to distribute tests, to accept the tests the World Health Organization offered, to bring in that federal lockdown on flights from abroad much sooner, to use the military hospitals to treat patients, for instance, and on and on and on. At least given the lead to states, there's only so much he can do. Obviously, the states have a wide degree of autonomy. So that, yes, people were going to die of this in the United States, but the death toll didn't need to be anything like as high as it's going to be. And there are many examples of best practice. So he's convinced some people that this flagrant lying by him is the industry standard in politics, and it's not. Okay, so yes, everybody lies, politicians lie, but not as much as him, and they're not such outright lies, might be at least closer to the truth in most cases. I wish I could say that justice is sure in his case. I don't think it is, and justice is certainly not swift. So witness the many happenings over his presidency, handing out lies over the airwaves all the time, things that anyone with half a brain knew were going to be true. The 26th of February, saying that within 15 days it would down to be almost zero case of coronavirus, or saying that his poll numbers were higher than they really were in 2016, or saying that millions of illegal immigrants voted for Hillary Clinton, or saying that Muslims celebrated in New Jersey the fall of the World Trade Tower, and on and on and on. Just more barefaced lies. I could be here all night recounting lists of the falsehoods that he's peddled. So criminals obviously just have no truck with the truth, no respect for veracity at all. So he's committed crimes in pretty well all categories. Now, some of these I can't prove, not to the criminal standard, but on the balance of probabilities. So he's got so much swag in his bag. So smashed the record for the things he's done in office. Not in a good way, but he's always boasting about the things he's achieved. But where did his plans go wrong? Well, on coronavirus, there wasn't a plan. Some of his plan to build the wall hasn't really got off the ground, or to get Mexico to pay for it. That hasn't worked. Or to win that trade war with China hasn't worked, and on and on. And to make medicines way cheaper and way better, that hasn't worked, and on and on. So he's committed crimes against peace, threatening North Korea. Little rocket man. Okay, North Korea possesses nuclear weapons. There's no law to say they're not allowed to have nuclear weapons. Is it very worrying? Is it very dangerous? Yes, it certainly is. I'd far rather they didn't. But the United States possesses nuclear weapons. They didn't secure anyone else's permission before creating them, and threatening them with fire and fury, sort of irresponsible rhetoric, which could cause a war. Could have been a nuclear first strike by the United States, which obviously would have been a war of aggression, or illegally occupying Syrian territory against the wishes of the Syrian sovereign government. So that's a war of aggression. So he is to be condemned. But Trump is so malignant. I'm just worried that the devastation he's wreaked in the United States will last after his time in the presidency. And his wrongdoing is so grave that it can't be tolerated. It shouldn't be ignored. Could his rule be extended in this upcoming election? Possibly. People saying the United States won't survive it. I think it will survive it. Joking about being president for life. Is he joking? It's only half a joke. He'll say things and try and get out of it by claiming it was a joke, like some of his minions like Ann Coulter, when Trump publicly called upon whoever was hacking Hillary Clinton's emails to carry on doing so. So inciting people to commit espionage against the United States, and she claimed that was a quip. I've never known Trump to laugh. I don't think he does mirth, actually. He does no humor, just a below-the-belt punch. So that's how he's just so unmanly, the way he'll always go for the raw nerve. He's vile, always pick on the weakest. So, flushed with victory, he could have been a bit magnanimous to Hillary Clinton, but no, he wasn't, and obviously had to lie about the scale of his win in 2016. But he's so often stung with injury if anybody asks him a worthwhile question, saying it's a nasty question. We'll answer the nasty question. He's obviously not tough. If you can't stand the heat, get out of the kitchen. He could resign as president. Well, I don't think that's going to happen. So some people don't want to stay the hand of vengeance against Dr. Fauci, his medical advisor, and that's why he's had to have bodyguards. People threaten to kill him just for telling the plain truth about how bad it is. He's urging people to do more social distancing, unlike the president. So I hope one day that Trump is submitted to the judgment of the law. It's such a pity that Mueller didn't give him the whole 9 yards and make him testify under oath and subpoena his tax returns. And lots of subpoenas have been issued by Congress, and the Trump administration has not cooperated. I don't know how on earth they've got away with that. So it's so often these law enforcement agencies, they pay an excessive tribute to the executive that they're meant to be investigating and keeping in check. And the compliment is not returned, that he has no respect for the FBI or any of the security, any of the intelligence community, and that's part of his criminal character. So one thing I noticed about him, he's got no sense of the abstract. It's all about tangible things, about buildings and money and people, not ideas of right or wrong or freedom or about what that is. That being allowed to do what you want and being safe from various things. No, it's got to be money who actually has power. Never seems to support opposition candidates anywhere. Or, for example, like in London, that much that he loathes Sadiq Khan, the mayor of London, has nary a word to say about the opposition. Anyway, no law can be too abstract sometimes, but we do know certain things aren't allowed, like defrauding people, like calling your organization a university when it's not, and getting people to pay fees on that basis. So how does he get away with something which is just so flagrantly fraudulent? Anyway, so Trump is not practical either in terms of achieving things because he's lost so much money. And he's not really achieved many of his goals as president. What has he done that he said he would do? Okay, he shifted the US embassy to Jerusalem. I'm trying to think anything else. Okay, he ended the Iran deal. The stock market was going quite well for a long time. But Trump, much though he has no respect for the law, he will utilize it when it suits him, as a hoodlum would. So he's very aggressive, threatening lawsuits, threatening to sue people. I'm not sure he's ever sued anyone successfully. I've heard he's been sued many, many times. I don't know how many times he's lost. So his common sense demands that when Bill Maher said, "I'll pay you $5 million if you can prove that your mother wasn't an orangutan," and Trump thought that that was like a contract. Common sense demands that you recognize that this was a quip and honestly got a lawyer onto the case. So Trump is now possessed of great power, but in whose interest does he wield it? Well, his own primarily, but also others of the billionaire class. He's made concerted use of it for his own enrichment, as I already adumbrated. Unjust enrichment. So the magnitude of his wrongdoing is just jaw-dropping. And he sets such a poor example because children will look up to him as a role model. People in the military, obviously doing half of this, he'd be in big trouble. Remember seeing one psychiatrist saying, well, if he was cyberbullying and I was a military doctor, I would have to remove him from his command. So I'd like to see him as a prisoner in the dock. And some of his underlings have been there, 10 odd broken men, some of them sent to prison for the various crimes. The best people, as Trump would say, he chose them. What does it say about his judgment? Is very injudicious, to put it mildly. So I would like to see him reproached by those who previously supported him. But I think that too many dyed-in-the-wool Trump supporters who'll never give up on him. Remember, some of these gangsters have a following. People think that they have some social conscience or communal spirit, things like that, or just impressed, think they're tough. You know, could say about Escobar or John Gotti, Al Capone, and Trump is sort of in that vein. So I'd like to see him face a humiliation, but I don't think it's likely, unfortunately. So there's been such desolation in the American political scene in the past few years, the way blatant lying has just been normalized, and spewing racial hatred by Trump, that's become normalized as well. trying to use coronavirus to make people xenophobic, make people hostile to Hispanic Americans, or people who are Hispanic who are not American citizens who are legally resident in the United States, and things like that, or to suggest that the Squad, these ethnic minority American women, that they're not American, that they don't have a right to be in the United States. Wow, it's staggering. A very sad degeneration for a country which is making progress on race relations. So his personal capacity for wickedness is unlimited. It's hard not to perceive how much America has disimproved since Obama ceased to be president, a professor of constitutional law, down to this absolute buffoonish scumbag that the United States got now, like cartoonish, as though all the country's vices are incarnated in a single person. So he dominates America, obviously, not just being president, but unlike others, constantly spewing out his message, just ever present. Think back to, was it Calvin Coolidge said almost nothing? No, maybe it was Hoover said almost nothing. Those were the days. It would be good to have someone who was laconic. But I think that can't happen in politics these days. So it's terrifying that this guy's got his finger on the nuclear trigger. But his fate is of consequence for future generations. If he was sent to prison for some time, that might warn other politicians. No, even the highest in the land is subject to the law. No one is above the law. So he represents a sinister influence, and I'm worried this may lurk for a considerable time after he ceases to be president, and indeed after he returns to dust. Trumpism may survive him, which is outright lying being a winning strategy, race baiting being a successful strategy, and really regressive economic policies and fiscal policies, that being a winning strategy, or what else, or denying climate change, things like that, being extremely irresponsible on the national debt. And that these are sort of staples of Republican policy. Really what they're about is enriching the super wealthy. So they'll pander to proletarian and middle class voters to get them to go along with this. Trump will pretend to care about the abortion issue just to appeal to the religious right. Anyway, so he is a living symbol of racial animus, as I pointed out, so often stoking hatred against ethnic minority groups. He has heightened interreligious asperity with his supposed Muslim ban, which wasn't even a ban on all Muslims, a ban on most people from certain Muslim countries, even non-Muslim citizens of the said countries. It was moronic. It was a contradiction in terms. It didn't fulfill what he said he was going to do. So often what he says is an oxymoron. So he's given aid and comfort to white supremacism, abetting them, the Ku Klux Klan types at Charlottesville, very fine people, and threatening state terror abroad, as I pointed out. So he exemplifies the arrogance and the cruelty of power gone wrong. It's like Lord Acton's dictum that power tends to corrupt, and absolute power tends to corrupt absolutely. Or it makes me call to mind another one of Lord Acton's sayings, that there's this terrible mistake to sanctify success, to say just because somebody won that he should have won and should be respected, or something was done that it means should have been done, and that was a desirable thing. But he thinks if people have power, then they must be respected and that they are good news. Now, I know it's smart for the president to have a decent working relationship with other world leaders if he can, but Trump just kowtows to the cruelest despots, and he scorns America's traditional allies who ruled democracies. So they're just undeniable proofs of his criminality, as I said, like with regard to the fraud of Trump University. Well, another thing is his first wife, Ivanka, accusing him of rape, saying, I don't mean in the literal or criminal sense, but that's the way he treated me. Now, if he did that to her, this woman he's married to for 20-odd years, does that make a bit more credible all the women, as I think 18 women who alleged sexual assault against him, I think in some cases including rape? Do I believe that he committed rape? Yes, I do, actually. I'm not certain that he did, but given his other observable behavior, he has previous on this. It's more likely than not that he did as he was accused of doing. He's a very powerful man, and you know that there'll be a lot of crazies coming after you if you have the courage to put your head above the parapet and accuse Trump of that. So he suffers from pathological pride. He's always had a lust for wealth and power, and I think avarice is not a good ruling passion in a president. So he's also lacking in calculation, which I don't think he used to be, partly because we're seeing the real Trump, the second childhood, now that he's senile. He just can't hold it in. He's emotionally incontinent, which is why he spews drivel, and he's prone to fly off the handle. He's so often irate. The slightest irritation, and that's it. He'll simply explode in puerile fury, or infantile fury, I should say. So that's why he's intemperate, he's impatient, like a starving infant. Those are the catalogue of crimes, as I say, has obviously covered fraud and covered rape. Perjury, I'm not sure he's actually said things under oath. Or a lot of people say taking illegal donations, or collusion with the Russian intelligence. That's really not even up for debate. The proof is irrefragable there about taking information of the Trump campaign from Miss Veselnitskaya, that Russian lawyer, the dirt on Hillary. The claim that the meeting was about adoption in Trump Tower, yeah, that's because the Magnitsky Act, these sanctions, the Russians hit back by not allowing Americans to adopt Russian children. And so if you repeal the Magnitsky Act, we'll allow Americans to adopt Russian children again. It was particularly disabled, very ill Russian children who tended to be adopted because people in Russia wouldn't adopt them. So Putin would rather hurt the most vulnerable children in his country than he would to have justice in his country, as in not murdering Magnitsky for telling the truth about corruption. So he's committed many heinous crimes, and however bad they are, he feels not a tinge of remorse about this. He's tried to take away so many liberties and dignities which Americans have long held to be their inalienable and natural right. Like he's so against the free media, the press, saying that they should be imprisoned for reporting the truth about him, inciting hatred against them, and really that's just a step away from violence, calling them enemies of the people. What happens to enemies of the people? They get killed, right? So you can just imagine some fanatical Trumpists then going one step further. So he has compensated for his inadequacies with spite towards others that somehow makes him feel big, feel tough. So he likes to inflame hatred against those he's marked out as scapegoats, like I said, much of the Washington press corps, but also stoking odium towards Mexicans, Mexican Americans, Muslims, and any other opponents, the Democrats, the FBI. He perceives them as an enemy. What does that say about him if he's so against law enforcement? Americans used to be for law enforcement. So no wonder there was a campaign of violence at his rallies, which he explicitly encouraged. And it occurred, and he knew this was happening, and it kept on going. I don't know how he wasn't jailed over that. So people are saying, oh, well, we'll see the annihilation of the United States as we know it. I mean, obviously, a lot of people are going to die because of coronavirus, but they mean the Constitution being abrogated. I don't think that's going to happen because, fortunately, it's quite robust, quite difficult to unpick. But the US hasn't seen such loathsome presidents since the days of slavery. And slavery, I think, is something he's never talked about. Doesn't think that was at all a shameful chapter in American history, seems to me. I know he's he discriminates against black people in accommodation, but I've not heard him say anything anti-black, and he has appointed senior people like Ben Carson or Omarosa to important positions in the White House. So I don't think he's anti-black. I'd be very happy to go along with white supremacists. Doesn't really motivate him, but if they're going to support him, if they'll give him money, yeah, sure. Buy a bull cap. So he made his mad gamble for mastery, and it seemed like he had no hope when he declared he was going for the presidency. It seemed like a joke in 2015. He tried to be vice president in the 1980s. About 2000, he tried to get into politics, got absolutely nowhere, and astonishingly, he won. So he's one for a wager, casinos. Is that really what Christian fundamentalists who back him are into? Gambling? Isn't that considered iniquitous? So anyway, he has diverted energies which should have been used to tackle things like climate change, um, and other resources. He's diverted them into his ludicrous schemes like his border wall, or sorry, it's not even going to be a wall, border barrier, or tax cuts for the super rich. And what effect will that have on poor people who then can't afford, Medicare, Medicaid being cut back? That'll kill a lot of people. His decisions will kill people because they're not going to get the operations and the medicines they need. It's sick. Um, anyway, he proposed that America should have just like robbed oil from Iraq. I mean, he said it in so many words in an interview in about 2011, which I've seen. I think it's with Piers Morgan. We should have just taken the oil, just a smash and grab. It was staggering to see him be that crude, but that's him. So there are those hapless creatures in cages near the border, but the press is not reporting about them. Those who didn't even have soap. I don't know if they're still there, and parents having no idea where their children were, phoning numbers, nobody answering. So these displaced persons, are they ever going to be sorted out? Unfortunately, the media spotlight's moved away from them, so their fate is grim indeed. So he's really just bestial in his cruelty to others, and he's a man of the highest bad faith. And yet the supporters still back him, follow his record over this trail of broken promises, but they still repose trust and confidence in him. So I'm hoping that he will arouse the slumbering forces of an imperiled democracy to boot him out this November, but I'm not overly optimistic. And then America can be emancipated again. The moment it seems to me that it's prostrate beneath Trump. But he's not managed to ban the media from saying things. The First Amendment is strong there. But it's worrying he should suggest that should happen. You can just imagine Republicans in Congress trying to do that. I don't think the Republicans in the Supreme Court would go along with them, even if they did have 2/3 in both houses. But constitutional amendments are very difficult to change. You need 2/3, like I said, in both houses of Congress. It hasn't happened for over 50 years. So he means injustice to so many people, as I say, partly social injustice, as I pointed out, tax cuts for the super rich, and how they're going to fund that by cutting healthcare for the needy, people who will otherwise die without it. It's hard to think of a more despicable policy. Anyway, so he's brought within the scope of his presidency like 250 years of history of building up rights for people, which he's so keen to take away, or scientific knowledge developing, so how we know that climate change is happening, and yet he breezily denies it. We don't debate whether photosynthesis is real, or does the heart pump blood around the body. They're not two sides to that one. We know what the truth is. You might find the odd cuckoo who says otherwise, but we know what the heart does. We know that photosynthesis is for real. So why on earth are people disputing climate change? Now, there's room for debate about how damaging is it, at what pace is it going on, to what extent is it anthropogenic, but there's no doubt that it is at least partly anthropogenic, rather than flat out denying that it's happening at all. Anyway, so he would love to ride roughshod over the Constitution. Fortunately, I don't think he's going to get away with that. I mean, as I say, he's managed to be in breach of subpoenas, and there are no consequences for him, which again flabbergasts me. But they say all politics is local. Well, local and limited events. Can he turn these to his advantage? If there's some sort of a Muslim shoots people somewhere, he could exploit that and stoke fear, direct animus towards Muslims, and that might be a vote winner for him. Every racist speech he delivers will probably give him another 10,000 votes. So he regards the blue states as enemy fortresses. So I hope he doesn't capture him. I don't think he will capture him more, but so much for Hillary's blue wall. Calling people enemy of the people, that was a new law. I don't think any American president's ever done that. So America is obviously quite a bifurcated country, and he wants to set people in deadly hate against one another. You'd hope that a president would be a uniter, not a divider, like Bill Clinton would want to be a uniter. So tens of thousands of tons of material for his border fence are there and not even being built. Well done, Donald. He makes common cause with despots so often, and these people are often gangsters themselves, and that's who he really admires. Anyway, how was it that Mueller's researches were so incomplete and he didn't get those tax records? We could find out how much money Trump really has and where his money's coming from. Follow the money. Everybody knows it's the simplest investigatory stratagem ever. He never did any professional work, which is interesting. I mean, obviously, Obama was a lawyer and a professor. Also, quite a few presidents were like Bill Clinton or George W. Bush. Well, managing his oil company, that's kind of professional. But Trump had his business, but they were so catastrophic, and yet managed to convince some people that he's massively successful. So I don't think it's adequate in any area of the presidency. I scratch my head to try and find out something decent he's done. As I say, the economy was going quite well for the first couple of years. So I think the fuller development of time or access to archives will allow us to know more about Trump, because not everything has come to light yet. So we're obliged to leave to historians how he managed to get away with his crimes, how law enforcement were just so lax towards him, and then we could finally render a verdict. I'd love to see him spending the rest of his life in Supermax. I don't think it's probable. But he's managed to appeal to American particularism. We're different, we're not socialists. Well, Americans can have any political viewpoint, including socialism, including communism. The Communist Party of the United States was always legal. It didn't get anywhere in electoral politics. And you, just as you can be an anti-socialist in America. So it's not that these two things are inimical to each other, and indeed that they're utopian socialist communities in the United States to this day. And why is it, let's say, healthcare in veterans hospitals, that's capitalist, but that sort of healthcare for everyone would be socialist? It doesn't make any sense at all. There's no difference of principle there. So it ought to be candidly faced that there's a dramatic disparity between the way Trump and Obama were treated by the media. Obama, who was really hauled over the coals for quite small things, or his wife, who was excoriated for showing her arms, whereas Trump's wife posed naked for photos, admittedly not while she was First Lady. So they were treated very differently. There were such double standards there. And Obama, he wasn't a crybaby. He wasn't whining that the media gave him a hard time, whereas Trump is. Obama had a very thick hide on him, someone who, with every passing year, seems better and better, especially if you contrast him against that absolute monstrosity, Trump. So Trump is all about the victor and the vanquished, and he thinks he's a winner, which is not true. He's obviously lost loads of things, and to be absolutely sadistic to the vanquished, that's his attitude. He's so categorical about things. People think they're good or bad or whatever. You're on his side, you're against him. Doesn't do shades of grey. He's Manichaean, but not in the ethical sense. As I suppose gangsters would be like that, but he sees everyone as a potential mark. So when is he going to be defeated? Well, hopefully he's only allowed to run one more time, that he won't manage to change the Constitution. I really don't think he will. It seems to be that there's futility in appealing to reason if you're attempting to win over Trumpsters, because they're just so unreasonable if they've stuck with him unto this point. And he's used his high station to feed their prejudices against liberals and against science and against education, clever people saying that they're snobs and smart alecks. Admittedly, there's some truth in what he's saying there. Or against gun control activists. And by the way, I don't think I've never seen him with a gun. You'd think he'd try and curry favour with them by posing with a gun. Even John Kerry took a photo opportunity with one. So you might want a just and measured retribution for Trump, but as I say, in my case, I think it would be Supermax for the rest of his life. There could be an unthinking cry for vengeance. I know a lot of people want him dead. I'm not in favour of the death penalty, but I could make an exception in this case. And one thing about Republicans is I know they don't attempt to draw a line between opinion and fact, or they just opine on, so often breezily deny the truth about climate change or anything like that, or about how publicly funded healthcare is often far, far better than what there is in the United States. Or the idea that the United States, that Americans are richer when there's more overall wealth, but it's obviously not for the average person at all. So in approaching these difficult political questions, one has to summon all the intellectual integrity and detachment one can muster to try and get at the truth, and only then can you formulate sensible policies. But people are so emotional, and I am too, and sometimes it's difficult to set aside such prejudices. So Trump hasn't done anything to commend himself to posterity when he could have done a few good things about this coronavirus outbreak. It wouldn't have been difficult to get it a bit right. So was he doing to fulfill America's aspirations to do justice, to uphold freedom? That's what it's supposed to be about. I don't think see how he's enlarged freedom in any way, or done justice in any way. He's vile. So it'd be good to see him on trial pleading for his life, but it's not going to happen. Wish there could be a new charter to give people healthcare as a right. Anyway, his defeat is America's best hope, but it's by no means a foregone conclusion. So many billionaires will do lots of favors for him, but in a trial he'd be given a fair opportunity to defend himself, and there'd be no documents could be withheld. So he never handles himself with credit. In all his life, I think he's got not a single call upon the people's gratitude. He never acts with courage, moral or physical, but he enjoys a fair hearing from the media that is not extended to others. We've got a report where he says he's the president. I know he could get a presumption of innocence if he was on trial, and any lawyer could accept the burden of proving him guilty. They could do that in short order. So many criminal acts responsible for the commission of acts by his subordinates. The buck stops here. So there must be books and records to prove all his frauds. Might be a record breaker on that one. Now, I know I might disclaim responsibility because he's not known for his thoroughness. He was very cavalier about numbers. Now, but Trump is not without vanity, which is why he's going on to having $10 billion. He has $10 billion, but he can't prove where that came from. So he's been foolish enough to arrange himself to be photographed with, like, say, people he's claimed to have nothing to do with, like Stormy Daniels. So there'll probably be lots of evidence of his shady dealings. I wonder what his home videos are like. Well, it's probably the same in privacy as in public now. So how do people not see his conduct and get revolted by it when he was mocking that disabled journalist 4 years ago? And hearing his voice is a raving, pernicious madman. But do people sort of hold him in fear? Is that why some people vote for him? I mean, they don't think he's going to come and get them. He doesn't seem a very cuddly sort of person. A nightmare, really, come to life. So his name has a new and sinister significance throughout the world. It's not just a hotel chain. It's about hubris and about cheerful disregard for truth and common decency. So I wonder if it could retard the US a century in terms of social justice or climate change. I don't think it'll be that bad, but there's going to be some sort of lasting effect of him. I really hope it would fuck over his party for generations. So why can't the case be opened against him? I think you can't prosecute a sitting president. That's what some people say. The indictment would be as long as my arm. He made his common plan a conspiracy that he made with Putin. His crimes against peace, well, like invasion of Syria. His crimes against humanity in regard to what he did, the unnecessary cruelty towards these illegal immigrants in the border wall. So many cases could be cited as precedent. Look up works of authority. He would be the defendant. So he's a man of supreme station who's not used this to enhance the common weal. It's always been about the betterment of the super rich. Not that that's a crime. But he's never soiled his hands with blood, apart from, well, drone strikes. These are debatable. But I don't think he's ordered anyone in the United States to be killed. He uses lesser folks as tools. They would carry about his frauds for him, like in Trump University. He's the planner, the designer, the inciter, the leader. He's on the promotional videos, and the money is going to him. There's an evil architecture that surrounds him. He's got these enablers. I'd like to see them on the dock as well. So towards this next election, the country might be scourged with violence as right on cue another caravan appears. He says it's got to prevent people coming into the United States, which might lead to lawlessness, vigilantes trying to attack these people. So violence might be wreaked upon the Hispanic community. I really hope not. He's committed numerous crimes, as I pointed out, planning, designing these large-scale frauds, to wit, selling people degrees which weren't actually degrees. He's always been fanatically committed to his own aggrandizement, which is why I couldn't resist putting Trump on the name of the university. So fraudulent schemes organized and promoted by him, well, even lying about the number of floors in his hotels or buildings. Anyway, like the conspiracy with Russia, which was executed by his campaign, and he's all talking about protecting people who will not peach on him, giving pardons. He's not actually done so. It's a Paul Manafort he might pardon. So there were written orders to meet the Russians to receive this intelligence they'd obtained illegally. He wants to see the persecution of the press, and he loves countries where that happens. So there's a continuous and deliberate pattern of kowtowing to tyrants, and directing his drone strikes against foreigners. Racism promoted by him. He's divided and embittered his people. But this doesn't stiffen the resistance of the Democrats. It seems they're clubbed insensible. Anyway, will there be a common plan with the Ruskies in the forthcoming election? Possibly. They methodically pursued their strategy last time, and it was crowned with success. And then America could be in prostration to Putin, especially Putin's got a PP tape of Trump, which wouldn't surprise me one bit. So he has largely failed to achieve his aims, Trump. As I say, the economy is going quite well in the beginning, but that's it. Okay, shifting the embassy. He's not accomplished any other goals. I suppose just to be rich, just to be even more famous. Those were objectives of his. All right, he's been successful in that wise. So his collaborators should be flung into a fetid dungeon as well. So it's authoritatively estimated that he took tens of millions of dollars from the Russian mafia knowingly. Receiving dirty money, is that a crime? I suspect it is. But perhaps some of the witnesses will have perished who were involved in that in the 90s. He's got so much money which cannot be accounted for. And contrast that with the treatment of people at the Mexican border, of displaced persons are not welcome in the United States. Give me your poor, your huddled masses, send them tempos tossed to me, as Emma Lazarus wrote. So his crimes were perpetrated countless times, and I don't know how law enforcement missed it. He's always acted with calculated cruelty. Perhaps that scared people off, but it dishonors the FBI. They were not able to put a case on him for all the things he's done. And as for splitting up families at the border, I mean, how could human beings inflict such suffering on each other, claiming to be a good Christian man? I suppose he thinks his enemies are inferior. That's why he doesn't have to feel sorry for them. That couldn't be me. That's why there's no empathy. And he summarized in The Art of the Deal that lying is really his modus operandi, hyperbole, even when that blurs into outright lying. So he has to be eliminated. I'm not calling for his assassination. Voted out and then given life imprisonment. We will catch him in the end, I hope. But it's sickening and noisome that he's adulated so much. There's so much evidence of the planned and systematic character of his many frauds, and yet he has the loving care of some of his Camarilla. I remember that original Mueller report was then not published in full, a redacted version, only by his Attorney General Bob Barr. No, not Bob Barr. I can't remember the guy's name. To look good for Trump, which was highly misleading. Was that not perjury? So this destruction of integrity is something that's deeply troubling and may have long-term repercussions. So it's like that honesty no longer exists in the Republican Party. There are a few courageous Republicans like Steve Schwartz who've rightly lambasted Trump. So people have been driven from the flames of Syria, would like to go to the United States. I don't know if any have come in under him. People could be lined up against the wall and shot by ISIS or Assad's regime. They'd like to be free. I know they could go to other countries like Turkey, but why not the United States? That's what was set up, really, a country for refugees. But Trump suppresses the truth very energetically, day and night, just like people like Assad about his crimes against humanity. There is an orgy in stables to clean out in American public life. Remember Drain the Swamp? What happened to that? And then appointing all these Wall Street insiders to his cabinet. So he's pursued his own glory, as he sees it, with merciless tenacity. He want to be president and get loads of money. But he burned a house down rather than hand over the keys to somebody else. He might refuse to leave, as they say, if he loses the presidency. So his proven total of lies is well over 10,000. Plenty of half-truths as well. How many can we add that he told in private? So he's blasting us with falsehoods which cannot be countered because they're coming at us so thick and fast. Technique called fire hosing. Anyway, and then his press conferences on coronavirus are another manifestation and culmination of this war on truth about how everybody can get a test and things like that. And yet he's very secretive about some things, about his sources of money, even though he's very open about other crimes he's committed. So the creation of his conspiracy was that with a sort of financial incentives from the Russians when he was colluding with them to defeat Hillary, or was it just because they had blackmail over him? I'm unsure. But there are industrialists on his side in America as well, just because, say, he's promoting dirty energy. So there are people who generally gain for him. You'd need to make elaborate alternations to sources of energy in order to pollute less, to switch away to green energy. And I know even a good president can achieve that, but he's gone right the other direction, not slowing climate change at all, speeding it up. So America's outstripping all other countries in pollution. Does so more than the whole of continental Europe. So anyway, when they knew coronavirus was coming, he should have made preparations of such a magnitude that surpassed all others, given America's huge population and the way it was going to be, had so many flights from badly affected areas like Western Europe and China. But he did nothing. Criminal negligence. But when it comes to aggressive purposes, he'd like to prepare, as in spending more on the military. So many crimes committed in the conduct of the war in Afghanistan and Iraq. But even very pugnacious people have accepted some limitation on the savagery of warfare, not to be deliberately killing civilians, but Trump doesn't agree. In the name of humanity, we've got to restrict what can be done. And the US has made itself party to many of these instruments of international law, and they're embodied in lots of international conventions, but he doesn't abide by those at all. And the American public have just stopped listening to this. There would be certain restraints on the treatment of belligerents, and they all should not be held in there all the time in Guantanamo Bay. If they're entitled to surrender, they have to get good treatment. They're not prisoners of war, they're criminals in which case is meant to get a trial. So they got brutal treatment in terms of waterboarding. I'm not sure they're doing it anymore. I don't think any of them have been murdered after capture, though. So his countrymen wouldn't like to be treated like that abroad. So if they're no longer to be prisoners of war, they've got to have a release date. They've got to have a trial first, and that's not happening. So he refrains from protecting them as he's obliged to because he's responsible. It's the US military is running Guantanamo Bay. So he boasts about ruthless warfare, but has obviously always avoided putting himself in harm's way. So he planned for commission of war crimes in Afghanistan, as in deliberately targeting civilians, and in Iraq and so on. Not deportation to slave labor, one of the few things he hasn't done. And I know ISIS was engaged in slaving operations in Syria and Iraq, so I know his enemies are vile as well. But the evidence is abundant and damaging about deliberate targeting of civilians by his forces in Iraq and Afghanistan, and he ought to be held accountable for that. His speeches, which are so boastful, he tears the skies with his braggadocio, but he doesn't tell them about the civilians deliberately killed. Anyway, people don't necessarily come voluntarily to a war zone. They might live there already. Even if they do come voluntarily, civilians, they still shouldn't be killed. It's no good saying they should have got out of there. Well, where to? A lot of countries won't accept these people. So perhaps further details will be published about that next time there's something like a WikiLeaks data dump. These are like crimes committed by a gangster, someone who's incapable of regret or compassion. And then we could deal with the common plan and design for various attacks in Iraq and Afghanistan. I shan't dwell on individual crimes because they're just too numerous, and he just shrugged it off. A particularly large-scale attack in Iraq killed dozens of civilians. the scale in which they occurred would obviously shock the world. And these incidents were not isolated or few. So he was a man in the most responsible position, and he's the ultimate authority. He orders it to go ahead. He must be held to account for that. Anyway, and he's answerable regardless of the fact that the crimes were actually committed by others, executed by others. They're further down the chain of command. So he lies as a matter of course. So he's persecuted others, but he must be prosecuted himself. That is the notorious Trump. Toodaloo.